we're here.
Hey, welcome to Storytellers with Coffee. This is the bi-weekly Twitch show where I grab any storyteller I can round up and we talk about stuff important to us. So, today we are talking about safety tools. Not just what they are and how to use them. That's going to be the first hour. But in our second hour, we're going to talk about problems that might show up when you use them, and how you should address those issues. We should probably start off by introducing ourselves. Jess, why don't you go first?
Hi, I'm Jess. You might see me down in the thing as Angry Nerd Girl. I run Paws and Claws on Tuesdays every week here on the Onyx Path. And on my own channel, I run Three Flings on Fridays, and I also write games and supplements. You can find all of that stuff on my Twitter, which is right underneath my face.
The best
Awesome.
place for it to be.
And Corinne, how about you?
Hi, I'm Corinne. I go as Manic Pixie Girl on Twitter. I run the Purge of the Serpent Holds game on the Onyx Path. And I also play in games, lots of other places, but my main home is Roll the Roll, which is my home Twitch channel. I'm a real big proponent of safety tools, and they're so super important. So I'm excited to be in this conversation.
Yeah, we are happy to have you. I'm sorry?
What?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard you say something.
No, you probably heard a thud behind me. I'm going to mute myself. There's some activity going on behind me. So I am here.
My name is Rachel. I am in a Scarlands game run by Travis, and I run Changeling the Dreaming Chronicle on Thursday nights on this channel. And I also moderate this show. So, let's start, I guess, just by talking about what a safety tool is for anyone who may not know.
So I would say that a safety tool is, there's a lot of different ones, but in general, a safety tool is something, a method, an action used to make a game safer when you're playing it, because tabletop is inherently a very personal experience. People are, letting themselves be vulnerable, and you have to have ways for them to tell you when something isn't okay, because you can't always, it's hard to break that moment sometimes. So there's a lot of different methods of doing it, but a safety tool is just something that is meant to make tabletop safer.
Cool. Jess, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think safety tools, yeah, they're there to make everything safer, obviously. But also, I think that a lot of people say that, safety tools make games less dark. Whereas in my experience, knowing what's okay, knowing the ground rules with your players, and knowing that you have boundaries in place lets you go to actually much darker or more personal places than you might not be able to without them, because you are aware of the boundary is what the boundary is. You know that someone will like tell you if you're pushing too far, and it lets you push other things instead. So I find them cool. Besides keeping everybody safe, they inspire creativity and let you have darker, more personal games in that way.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been my experience too, is that, when I know exactly where the boundaries are, I know also exactly where I can go. And excuse me. Uh, so let's start by talking about some of the safety tools that are out there and if you've ever used them and how that worked out. The first one that I have on my list is the consent checklist. That's something that I think is relatively new. There was one that was developed for D&D, and I just noticed that there are some free World of Darkness specific ones that just showed up on Storytellers Vault. So they're free. They're for World of Darkness. Go check them out. So anyway, a consent checklist is pretty much, it's a list of topics, and it's got all the, I guess the big ones. So how are you with abuse? How are you with profanity? How are you with religious themes? And the idea is, uh, you fill it out, and there are 3 options for I'm okay with it, I want to talk about it if it does show up, and this shouldn't show up in a game. I will not have fun if it does. And then, of course, there are blank lines for you to add your own stuff. So let me see. I have technically filled them out, but for games that never happened.
I recently filled one out because I play every Saturday on Sigil Entertainment's Storytellers Vault stream. And I think it's cool because I've always done lines and veils before my game, which is very similar. That's where, I would do like a Google Doc, basically, where I would tell people, just tell me what are things that you are okay with, but don't really want, like, on screen kind of thing. Like, what is your veil, as it were? Like, what are you okay alluding to, but not having here? And what do you not want at all? And then we would all talk about that in our session 0. But the consent checklist, you don't have to have people come up with their stuff, and you just kind of put everything out there. Then you have the spaces for them to add anything if they have something weird. Like, I have some weird things like we were talking about before this. Like, I don't want birds in my face, and that's not likely to be on anybody's checklist. So
most people won't guess that that's going to be a problem, which is why it's important that it's mentioned.
Right. Like, you'll usually see like snakes or spiders on there, but not so much birds in your face. So
Yeah. But you might get that one ST who just watched a Hitchcock marathon and just wants to get really, really in depth with their descriptions.
Yeah, birds right in your face.
Yeah. I'm not gonna have fun with that game. And so I think it's cool, and it's a way of getting everything out there that, like, lines and veils might not bring up. And then you can address it all. Like, everybody can see pretty much all of the stuff anonymously before you start to play. And the one that I filled out, the GM had filled it out first. So you got to see right off the bat, like, these are the things that will not be in the game. So a lot of them, I was like, oh, well, I don't even have to worry about that because we had really similar ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that, like, the main checklist, it started making the rounds like earlier this year, like I think in maybe January. I think that sounds about right. And I think it's a great idea because, beforehand, before like the actual like checklist came out and people were like, oh, this is a thing you can just use. I was always like, as a DM or GM or whatever, always making sure like, hey, these are the things that will not be in my game at any cost because they are a line for me. It is not something I'm going to do. And like, that was always something I would just tell my players straight out. And, I still do that. But this is a way for players to have just a big list of things and then be able to say, I didn't even think of this, but I don't want it included, which is really important because sometimes you don't think about things, even if, your DM asks you, you might not even realize, oh, that's a thing I could worry about. I didn't know. So.
Yeah, and you both touch on something that I think is really important for consent checklists and safety tools is, as a storyteller, you should be upfront about what kind of game you're running. So if you want to run a game where all the PCs are serial killers, so, vampire, that's fine and that's super cool. But your players should walk into the game knowing what sort of experience you have in mind, so they can either opt in or opt out.
Yeah, I've run games where I think that's where knowing your players and establishing things at the session 0 is so important, because I write games that have some really dark themes, like NPCs dealing with PTSD, or a lot of times there will be child death or child endangerment. And I know that some of my regular players don't like dealing with that. So those are things that, you know, we just won't play because those aren't the games for them. I'll play those with other groups of people, and that's fine. But I'm not going to be like, hey, can you, person who hates dealing with, you know, sexual assault and child endangerment, playtest this thing for me that I wrote that's like sexual assault, child death, the game. Yeah. I'm not going to do that because not every game is for every person.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's okay. And I sort of wish more gamers understood that.
Yeah, I think that's a big like misconception. Like people think that, you know, every game is for everybody when that's really not the case. Like if you want everybody at your table to be having fun and enjoying themselves and getting something out of the experience, you need to make sure that the player fits the table and the table fits the player. Otherwise, it's going to end up in, you know, like strife at the table, people being uncomfortable, or people just not getting what they were looking for in a game. Because if you have one person who's like, I want this to be a really silly game, and the other one's like, I want it to be incredibly serious, those two people are not going to get along, and you're just creating strife.
Yeah, I know some. I mean, I'm one of the writers from Uncaged, if you're familiar with that. And one of my fellow writers is also involved in Three Flings behind the scenes. And she was originally going to be DMing, like kind of on and off with me before schedules didn't work out. But she said right off the bat, like she has a severe phobia with snakes. And obviously Uncaged was inspired by the Medusa, so there are a lot of snake adventures. So she was like, I'm happy to run anything as long as it doesn't involve snakes. And that's fine, because I'm not going to be like, hey, I have to miss a week. Can you take over, you know, Snake Game the Snakening? She wouldn't be comfortable with that game.
Snake Game the Snakening, coming to a theater near you.
That's the title of my next adventure.
I mean, I'd play that.
I mean, I'd be into it, but, you know.
Subtitle, we are all snakes now.
Oh my god, that'd be great. You are a snake.
See, I live in the Southwest, so I am in theory afraid of rattlesnakes, and so I would definitely want to play that game as a way to sort of like channel that fear. So other safety tools, the X card, which is something that I have heard of. I have never used. As I understand it, it is mostly something that happens at conventions.
I've used it in home games.
Okay, cool. Tell me about it.
I think it's really important at conventions when you're playing with people you don't know. But I've used it at home games where I was not the storyteller or the game runner, because I think what happens a lot of times at home games is people think like, oh, we're all friends. We don't really need to have a session 0 because we all know each other and we know what we like, kind of thing. And I've had things I was super not comfortable with happen to my characters, things that triggered my actual PTSD. So I had to call the X card in a game. And I've had something similar, one of my other friends in a session, not the same session, but had something, and we did a check-in where I was like, would you like me to call the X card for you? Because he was super uncomfortable. And we ended up kind of doing, it's not the X card, it's like a pause, rewind, fast forward kind of thing. And we did like a pause so we could talk about what was going on.
Right. So I've never actually seen this implemented. So when you say calling the X card, like what does that mean? What happened?
Well, unfortunately in my case, the DM just laughed and didn't do anything about it. But ideally what happens, I've had it used for me as well with people I didn't know terribly well. And what happens is one of two things. You can give the option either to just like redo the scene without what was being X'd out, or you can just skip ahead to something else. Like, it's kind of up to them, to the person who either taps the X card or is like no to this. So you can either, if there's something like, for something benign, if there's something with like an older woman and you're not aware that one of your players just lost a grandmother kind of thing, they might call like X on this NPC. And so you would be like, okay, in the child approaches you. So like that old woman is now not an old woman. Or you might just fast forward to after the scene and be like, okay, well, that person gave you this, this, and this information.
And on my home channel, we use the X card because it's a really good way to let players know that they have agency for things they don't expect. Because like you can use, your safety checklist, and you've done that. You've had a session 0. Everybody knows the things that should be upsetting them. But in the case of, you just lost a grandmother, or things have changed, something happened to you recently, or even just something you didn't know would bother you. Suddenly you're in the moment and something's hitting you in a way that you're not comfortable with. You can, in a streaming case, you can make an X, or you can directly contact your DM and be like, hey, X on this, can we pause? And usually in a case of streaming, you would then like go to a break and try and figure out what the problem is, because sometimes you don't know exactly what it is, and then you can find a way to work around it, skip over it, or just change it enough so that that player is comfortable again.
Cool. So Chess, you mentioned lines and veils, which is another thing that I have heard of, but I've never actually seen implemented.
Okay, yeah, I love lines and veils. It's kind of like stuff, a pre-session 0, like a session -1 kind of thing that you give to your player, or that your players really give to you. So you ask them to provide you with a list of things that would be their veils, that are like things you are okay being mentioned, but they don't want to deal with being at the table. So like someone might be okay with like they don't want explicit sex in the game, but they're okay with it fading to black, basically. Like any veil is something that can fade to black. But a line would be like, I do not want this at all. So a common line is like sexual assault, torture, stuff like that. Like some people have violence against pets as a hard line, is a common one. Whereas other people might have those things as a veil. Like they're okay with it being alluded to in the world, but don't want it happening to their their characters. They don't want it, being expanded upon. And then at a session 0, you would talk about all of those. So that, it's not just the DM who isn't bringing them up, but other players wouldn't use one of those and accidentally trigger another player by like torturing an NPC for information.
Okay. And then one thing you mentioned a little bit earlier that I thought was interesting was that when you did your consent checklist, you said it was anonymous?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's interesting because whenever I've done it, I've always put my name on it.
I've had some be anonymous and some where only the DM knows what everybody's things are. But it's so all the players feel safer in the group if they don't know who says what.
Yeah, that way everyone can know what it is. Like if you're showing it to everybody, I think generally it's like you want everyone to know what they shouldn't be covering, but don't necessarily want them to know like, oh, this person doesn't want this covered, I wonder why. Like it raises a lot of questions that can then make people uncomfortable about saying the things that bother them. Because, if you don't want these people you're playing with, and maybe you don't know that well, or maybe you don't know in that way, to know, oh yeah, I really don't want to talk about abuse, that's going to raise a lot of questions that you didn't necessarily want to answer, And I think it's important to be able to if you're showing those safety lists to everybody, then anonymous is a good way to do it.
Yeah. My paradigm has shifted a little bit today. So one thing, I am primarily a LARPer. Not right now because nobody's LARPing right now. But one thing that we use is a series of hand gestures. And the idea is that you can use these to not disrupt immersion. And so the first gesture, it used to be an OK symbol, but then we lost that. Thanks, all right. So you just put a circle on your shoulder, and this is meant to be, I am asking you right now if you are okay. So if a scene is really intense. And so the player, if they're okay with how it's going, and they're okay with it escalating, thumbs up. And if you want it to de-escalate and you need this to like ramp down in intensity, thumbs down. Trying to get in the camera. And then there are and then the thumb to the side if you're okay with what's going on but you don't want it to escalate, thumb to the side. And then because not everybody is capable of doing an immediate emotional inventory, if you're like, I'm not sure how I feel right now, you do palm flat. And that is meant to be that's meant to be taken as de-escalate anyway, because they're not sure how they're feeling, which is probably like at the very least it's a yellow light. And yellow lights become red lights very quickly.
Yeah. That's really cool. I've seen that with cards, but I didn't realize that was a LARP thing. I knew that was like an S&M community thing, but it makes perfect sense that it was a LARP thing too.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. I was like, I know that's, an S&M community thing, but I didn't know that it applied to LARP, which makes complete sense. It's a very similar sort of thing where people might not be able to automatically say how they feel about a situation.
There's a lot of crossover, so someone probably stole it from one community and ported it over.
Yeah. It started with somebody, and the other person was like, well, this works here.
Yeah, I'm
gonna go take this to the thing I'm doing next weekend.
I'm gonna plug my friend Steph really quick. Luciella Scarlett has some gorgeous cards that are actually for that, like with an O and a Q, that are all illustrated with animals that you can use at your table, and all of the proceeds go to RAIN, the Rape and Incest National Network. So those are on
really
Drive
cool.
Through RPG.
Okay, what should people look for? What sort of title should they search for?
Oh, I'll find them. I wish I could put it in the thing, but Onyx Path is like, no.
Okay, well, we can say it out loud.
Yeah.
So another thing that got brought up was Session 0, which
if you look up
RPG
safety cards.
Okay, RPG safety cards.
Yeah, and they're really beautiful. But if you are afraid of snakes, these are not for you, because one of them is a snake.
So a safety warning on the safety cards.
Yes.
Yeah.
They do include snakes. Worry about that if you are afraid of snakes.
Yes.
Yes. And so I guess the last thing that I wanted to bring up was Session 0, which that I have done a lot of and I have participated in. And Session 0 is pretty much like it used to be just let's all create our characters together. And it sort of evolved from there where the storyteller would talk about, okay, here's the game I want to run. Here's the themes that it should have. And at first it started out as, here's the sort of characters you should make. This is going to be a heist game, so make people who are good at breaking and entering, and no paladins because they might have problems with that. And then it just sort of evolved into like, yeah, let me talk about some of the themes that might be harmful. Like, I'm playing, I want to run a game where everybody's a serial killer. Back in the day, uh, someone that I knew had just watched it and really wanted to run that sort of game where, so there's this game, it's extremely dark. It's called Little Fears, where you play as children. Uh, and there are, if I remember correctly, there are 7 demons in this setting who are all representations of childhood fears. And some of them, like, are extremely dark. Like, the creepy priest does exactly what you would expect him to do. And so, yeah, so we're gearing up to play this game, and that is something that you definitely want to talk about, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Yeah, and so that's what the session 0 is for, and I find that I prefer them as sort of the best way to get a game started, because that it feels like kind of organic, and getting to know who you're going to be playing with if you haven't like met them or played with them before. And yeah.
Yeah, I think session zeros are a great tool, because especially like now when a lot of people are playing online, they're playing with people they haven't met before. You're getting into like you're maybe you can't play with your home group anymore, and now you're reaching out. And if you don't know people well, or if you've never played with a DM before or a GM before, storyteller, like it's very much that it's great for a group that's been together for a long time to set the theme of the game itself to make sure everybody's on the same page. But I feel it's even more important when people don't know each other, when they don't know the people they're playing with. They've never played with this person before. And I think it can make such a big difference to have that session 0 where you go over things. Hey, we're not going to touch on this. I won't ever. If you have anything you don't want me to touch on, let me know. You can let me know anonymously or right now. And and then just, hey, what kind of players are we? What do we do? How do we want the story to go? And I think it's just a fantastic tool for just setting the tone of your table when you don't know people very well, or when you haven't played a specific type of game before.
Yeah, I very much agree.
Yeah,
Jess,
I think it's also a great idea to kind of gauge what players are going to be, like, if the players will match the game kind of thing. Like how Rachel was saying, you were with some people who are going to play Little Fears, and if somebody in that game was like, I'm not comfortable playing a game where children are in danger, then right away you might know, well, maybe this is not the game for you, and maybe we want to bring in a different player. But like we still want to play games with you, just not this game, kind of thing. And yeah, like I've run Bluebeard's Bride, which is probably the darkest game that I've ever run.
oh,
But
I really want to play that. That looks so good.
it is really good, but we had a big talk about it beforehand and then a decompression session afterwards to talk about like things that came up and how we felt about everything in there. And it was important for me going into that too, like just to talk to people and be like, are you okay with references like body horror? Are you okay with intimate partner violence? Are you okay with, abortion or sex assault? Because all of these things might be brought up. And seeing where, like, people knew it was a dark game going in, but seeing like which aspects they were comfortable with, which things we could push is important. And yeah, nowadays when I meet someone who says their session 0 is just character creation, it blows my mind. Like I have met people who have said that, and they're like, oh yeah, my DM just says this is character creation, this is what the world is, and then they don't want to talk about anything else. and it almost like hurts me.
Well, there's just so much more to talk about, you know, to make a good game, to make a good experience for everybody. There's so much.
Yeah, and I've noticed that you know, some storytellers seem to rely on the element of surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I tell you what the game is about, it will ruin it. Yeah.
I mean, one of the most fun campaigns I've run was Princesses Save Dragons, and the whole game is right in the title.
Well, and like, you know, this is actually something I was just about to bring up, so I'm glad you brought it up. I think a lot of, you know, people who are running games, they do worry that if I give these warnings, if I, you know, tell my players what we're doing, it's going to ruin twists and turns and things like that. But it really doesn't have to. You're not saying exactly what's happening. You're not saying this person's going to do this. You're just saying, hey, this is a topic that's being covered, or this is something that is written into the story. And you can even warn players before sessions. Like for my game, I had recently, there was some like NPC death that was going to happen, and it was going to be pretty brutal and very sad. And I let my players know before each session that it occurred in that, like, hey, in this session, there is going to be some very serious topics. There is some NPC death. And I want to warn you all right now, you know, if at any point you're uncomfortable with that, let me know. I can fade to black here. We can shift gears a little bit. We can do something to make it different. I didn't have to tell them which NPCs were dying. I didn't have to say, like, oh no, these people were attacked by bandits and they're so dead right now, or these people literally got melted, which is the thing that happened. And it created, like, they were still incredibly, like, the characters were nervous and worried and they were stressed out in a good way, but the players were not. Like, they weren't nervous for the setting, but they knew that at any point they could stop if they needed to, which was incredibly important for me to be able to set that scene for them without worrying that, oh no, somebody's not actually having fun right now.
I think you bring up a great point in that the characters are nervous, but the players are not. Because
exactly,
you want the players to be having fun. You want the players to be safe. The characters can be scared out of their goddamn minds. But the players, like, it should not stop being fun for them. And sometimes being fun can be being scared. But you don't want to traumatize your players. You might want to traumatize their characters.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, there is a certain level of suspense and being scared that is fantastic, especially for me. I like being scared in a game. I like being, like, it being suspenseful and not knowing what's going on. Like, I like that personally. But at any point, I don't actually want to be afraid for my own well-being.
Yeah.
And if I feel that, you know, the person telling me the story is doing something that actually makes me upset beyond the realm of what I'm comfortable with, then that's an entirely different story. I don't want to be, you know, actually upset when I leave the session.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. And this is something that the LARP community talks about a lot. Issues, we call it bleed. And so I like to say that bleed is what's at the end of immersion. Because when you go to a LARP, you want an immersive experience. You want to feel like you are your character and you're moving as your character and talking as your character, getting into fights as your character. And that it's a lot of fun. It's a really intense experience. But, you know, if you get into a screaming match with another character who's maybe played by your friend, you know, there's always the danger that, you know, you perceive your friend as attacking you. Or, you know, if your character has a very bad experience, and this happens a lot with vampire games. So, like, you try your best to overthrow the prince, and you are at the top of your game when it comes to scheming and politicking and manipulating other people, and it fails, and you feel like you failed. And so that's bleed, and it's something that the LARP community talks about a lot, about ways to handle bleed when it comes up, what to look out for, what to expect. Um, so it doesn't really apply to tabletop games, but my favorite bleed management is whenever I come home from a LARP, I take a shower. Which, if I'm at a weekend buffer LARP, I want to do anyway.
You probably just need it at that point.
Depends on which site we used, but yeah, and so decompression sessions, which I think Jessica brought up, those are also really, really useful. Like I am in a group chat that I think has been going for 4 years at this point. It started when we were all back from a vampire game. Nobody could sleep. And so one guy just pulled us all into a group chat. And we talk to each other like every day now in this chat. But yeah, like when that game was still going on, that was how we used it, was for us to like talk to each other and sort of come down from game. Afters is another really good tool. It's good to share a meal with people.
Well, and one thing that I do, because right now every game that's being run, generally speaking, is online unless you already live with the people.
Yes.
But so like after I've run my stream, for instance, usually the players and I, we just hang out and chat for a half hour to an hour. We decompress from the session. Sometimes I show them cute things or cool things that they missed, or like, hey, you chose not to fight this creature. Look what it would have done to you if you did, like just kind of breaking it down in a way where like, yeah, that was an intense session, but it was just a game. We're all friends here, and you successfully did it. You successfully played a game, and now we're going to go back to real life and eventually start asking about each other's, like significant others, or what you're doing after this, and kind of break away from what you were doing before in a way that is gradual instead of just, all right, we're done, let's go. So
yeah, on Storytellers, well, we do a thing called Stars and Wishes, and we actually do it on the stream afterwards. We're like, everybody goes around and highlights like their star, like their favorite thing about the game that we played, and then their wish, which is something that we want to see in the next game. Which,
I like that.
Yeah, I love it. It's like a decompression tool that we do in front of the audience, and then afterwards, after the stream is over, we do like a private, short little decompression thing. On Three Flings, we actually kind of turned our decompression session into patrons only after show. So it goes up on our Patreon. We do like a little 20-minute talk about like what we liked about the adventure because every week it's a one shot from Uncaged. So we talk about like things that they missed, things that they liked about it, things that they didn't like, what made them uncomfortable, and basically what Courage just said, that and then we chat it out and make sure everybody's doing okay, which is a huge thing because some bleak stuff can happen.
Oh yeah.
In a lot of the games that we play, like even in Pugmire, which is like Onyx Path's family friendly thing, we get into some dark stuff on there, and every week after the show we have 20 minutes, maybe 30 sometimes, after the show, just kind of chatting on Zoom about how's everybody doing. How was that?
Yeah. What did you like? What didn't you like? How do you feel? and I think that's really important. It's a really easy thing to do, that make sure that everybody's still having fun, because we're playing a game to have fun and to feel emotions. And if at any point it stops being enjoyable and something the person doesn't want to do, it's really important to figure out why, especially if that person, you want to keep playing games with, which is generally the way it goes. You usually just want to like, oh yeah, screw you, get out of here. Usually not the case. Maybe every once in a
while. So these are all the safety tools that I have heard of, that I've used, that I've seen. If the audience has other safety tools that you want to talk about, please mention that in the chat. Also, if you have questions that you want to ask, we do take questions. Um, I suppose before we move on to the next phase, the last question I wanted to ask is, do you, and we sort of like touched on this already a little bit, do you think that there's a difference in using safety tools when you're playing just a private game with your friends and when you're streaming for an audience?
Absolutely.
Definitely. It's if you want to go first, you can.
People on a stream, I think, are much less likely to use to say when something makes them uncomfortable. And that's why it's so important to have a session zero to establish your lines and veils or your consent checklist or whatever you're doing. Because in the moment, I've noticed on streams, people are less likely to say X or pause or whatever you're using because players get in the mindset of the show must go on. I need to perform. I can deal with this later. And that's why it's your job as the storyteller to check in and be emotionally aware of what's going on, because it's not just our world that's going on. It's, everybody who's playing. And if it's clear that somebody is not having fun or is not doing okay, sometimes like I'll send a private message to someone just to be like, are you doing okay? Are you like distracted because you're waiting for your pizza? Or are you distracted because you don't like what's happening right now? Kind of thing, without interrupting the game.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, it's very much like people will get into the mindset of, oh, we are providing entertainment. The show must go on. We can't stop because we don't want, to mess up the story. And I think that's so much more apparent when you're streaming because there's other people watching you, whether that's one person or 20 people, or, even more than that. It's very much like streaming is great because it does create like a sense of accountability. You're less likely to just have a player miss just because they, don't want to, or whatever, you're more likely to get your players coming back. But at the same time, that creates a social contract that they might not feel safe bringing forward their problems during a stream. And that's why safety tools become even more important, because you need to know that your players are going to tell you when they're uncomfortable, and like that they are going to let you know how to make the game the best for them as well as everybody else. And yeah, I just think it's very much, it's doubly important to do it with a stream game, because you don't know how that player is going to react to being on a stream and how much pressure they're going to put on themselves, because some people put a lot of pressure on themselves to, not disrupt the game.
Yeah, and a lot of times players don't know they have a trigger until it comes up. And I've had that happen with players on a charity stream.
Oh no.
Yeah, and they feel extra pressure because it's for charity to keep going. And that's where we've had like really big decompression sessions kind of afterwards. And I'm like, it's okay to stop or to like retcon something, having a lot of like private chats as we're playing the game to make sure that everything is okay.
Yeah, it is. It's super fun to find out that you've got a trigger at a weekend-long LARP.
Oh no.
Yeah. One of my regular games decided to go somewhere extremely dark. And they would write like really intense sort of like pre-game stories. It got a little graphic. And they kept it up at the game, and I didn't realize, like, oh, I'm having a reaction to this.
Yeah, like it's, and and it basically, it can happen at any time. You can become uncomfortable, you can be triggered by something, it can be something you didn't even know bothered you until someone touches on it and you're like, oh, that's a no for me. But I can't nope out of here right now because I feel this pressure on me. I'm on a stream, I'm in a charity stream, I'm physically at a place I can't leave. And that's when you need a safety tool to be able to redirect, because otherwise you're not going to have fun, and that is going to affect the entire experience.
Yeah, that's why for my games, and I reiterate it before every game, but I think players need the reminder, and even sometimes throughout the game, that like it's okay to get up and walk away, even on a
Mhm.
stream. Like you don't even have to put bio or BRB in the chat. Like if something is really triggering you or upsetting you, the show is gonna go on even if you need to step away for a minute. Like
Oh yeah.
your character will be okay. I'm not going to murder your character while you're not here. You know, like we will make do. It's okay. Take like you as a player come first more than the game or the story or whatever. Like there is always a it's okay to step away rule in anything that I'm running.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that Comat in the chat says, ensuring that everyone is having a good time is my biggest responsibility. He's saying that like as a person running a game, and that, you know, if you ever do see anyone who is uncomfortable, even if it's in a stream or something like that, you can just DM them and see if they're okay. As Jess mentioned, like you don't have to necessarily put everything on hold, but you do need to check in. And sometimes that requires putting everything on hold. Sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on the situation. And there's really no guide for that necessarily.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one thing that I remember someone commenting in the chat when I was running my Changeling game. We were getting a little silly. It was near the end of the session. And so we were not like we did not have our performers face on. We were just it was more people around a table. And someone commented in the chat, I really like this. You guys seem like real people. And, you know, that is stuck in my head as you don't need to be on all the time, even if you're streaming. Because even if you get silly, or even if something comes up and you need to step away, whether it's the pizza's here or this is uncomfortable, uh, I feel like, maybe the audience likes that. Maybe the audience likes a reminder that, we're not actors, we're just nerds like you.
Big old dorks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a moment on Paws and Claws recently where I was so terrified that I actually traumatized my players because I described a monster and they just went nope and like pulled out their headphones and walked away.
What was the monster?
Spider goats from Pirates with Pugmire, transforming from their cute goat form to their monstrous, more spider-like form. And they were okay. One of them actually did go get pizza during that time, but they were like, no, it was just, oh.
It was a bad mental image.
Yeah, they were like, no, I'm fine. It was just, I needed a minute.
Yeah. Well, and, like on the idea of you don't, like the players don't have to be performers all the time. The DM or GM doesn't have to be on all the time, even if you are streaming. And, I do think that's super important. Like, in my game, my players are constantly making goddamn puns and just all the time. It is like, it can be an incredibly serious moment and then like pun. And I'm like, there it is. And we all have a good laugh about it. Usually someone's like groaning and like pretending to walk away like, well, it's been great playing with you, but I have to go now. That was awful. And, I think moments like that are like what help even viewers realize that, hey, this is still a game, as serious as it gets. Humans are humans, and we're all just so weird.
Yeah, and Jess, when you mentioned your players reacting to the spider goats, it sort of like brought to mind another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on, in that, if so sometimes when someone brings something up, when they call the X card, when they you know, just call a hold to everything. Sometimes you do need to stop and talk about things and talk it through, but sometimes you don't. And so, every use of a safety tool should not require like a full convocation, because sometimes it's just, I just needed a minute after that description. I'm good now.
I was just a bit disturbed by spider goats, and I'm fine. Yeah, I'm good. I'm not gonna have nightmares about this later or anything, but I just needed a minute.
They're so cute.
I mean, I imagine, like, for Maximum Impact, you probably played up the cuteness.
Yeah, until they transformed.
Yeah.
They're like spider goats, and then they get afraid, and then they turn into, like spider goats.
I love this concept. Can I steal spider goats?
I mean, ask Eddie Webb, but sure.
No, I had my players have a quite visceral reaction to some spiders, so I don't think I actually want to do that to them.
Apparently, their webbing is great for sailing, for ropes on a ship, and their milk is quite nourishing.
Oh, just get a good old glass of spider goat milk.
Yep. What do you think you've been drinking this whole voyage?
Strong.
No. My mage ST is in the chat and just says noted for future paradox botches.
Spider goats coming to a game near you.
Yeah, so I suppose the last thing I sort of wanted to touch on, which we sort of have brought up already, before we move on, is just because you have safety tools doesn't mean full steam ahead. I mean, that's what it implies, but you as a storyteller still have a responsibility to stay aware of your players and to be proactive about checking in. So even if session 0 was 6 months ago and your players were like, oh yeah, I'm fine with this, I'm fine with this, I'm fine with this, and you decide, okay, well let's go somewhere darker, let's go somewhere more intense, you want to check in also before that particular game session and possibly even during. It's like
midway breaks is a good thing to do as well. If you think that, something could be sensitive, like if you've gone to a darker place in this session, there's midway break is a great way to be like, hey, everybody get up, go to the bathroom, go get a drink. We'll discuss this real fast when you get back, just like to make sure everybody's okay with where you are. And if anybody is, not having fun right now or not into it, then a midway break is a great way to even just check in during even a stream or a home game or anything like that. Because it's a time to step away from the table and get out of the moment. And you could even do it on a cliffhanger, be like, and then the door opens. Time for a midway break.
Yes.
Yeah, I always like doing a little break right before we have a big decision to make. And it's like, hey, chat, tell us what they should do now, as we have to go actually talk about something important.
Yeah. And yeah, it's so easy to involve your viewers in that, be like, and we go to break. What do you think's happening next? And, they can do that while you all discuss, like, is this okay? Like, things are going to get real serious right now. Are you okay with that? So.
Yeah, and it's nice. I mean, Corrine mentioned telling your players before something's about to come up. I have some regular players who I know what their triggers are, but I also know that some of them can flare up more than others. Like if I know that one player is going through some grief stuff and we're about to play something that deals with grief or suicide, I will give that player a heads up. I might actually give all of the players a heads up, but particularly that one, just so that they know. And I'm like, hey, so do you still want to play tonight's episode kind of thing, or do you want some time off?
Yeah, like, in case like that, you can always be like, hey, talk with them, be like, are you okay with this? If not, your character can be doing something else. Like, you don't have to be here today if it needs to happen and you can't and don't want to. You don't have to,
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a title up on Storytellers Vault. It's Rose City by Night. It's about vampires in Portland, and chapter 6 is an introductory adventure. And so I wrote this in like 2017, and the introductory adventure is about a plague coming to town. So I just recently updated it because, in January, people probably would have been okay with running a plague story. I don't know how everybody's feeling right now, but just so you know, that's what this story is about.
I mean, if you can defeat the plague, then that could be really cathartic for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's sort of why I wanted to keep it, because I have talked to people who do really enjoy going to dark places in their games as a way to like sort of work through something, get catharsis. So, and I think games are awesome because they let us do that.
Well, there's always the joke going around that, you start running a game to tell stories with your friends. You end up being their impromptu therapist and helping them work through their issues while they're like a dwarf barbarian, like it's ridiculous, but it's kind of the way it happens. There are people who want to go towards the things that upset them because they want to work through them. And it's important to make sure the rest of the table's okay with that as well, because
yes,
just because one person wants to do it doesn't mean everybody else does. And that's when you have to have that discussion of, hey, is it okay if we cover this? And that's something that can change.
Yeah, I find that comes up a lot in my games because I actually am a therapist. But I'm almost like, I'm not your therapist. So
Yeah.
We can go through some stuff in the game. But if there's something really deep that you want to work out with, like if something comes up and you realize this is something you really want to explore, please do not explore it with me because I am your friend.
Yeah.
This is my day off.
Legally, I can't be your therapist.
Right. Like, I literally cannot do this for you. So I can refer you to someone. But
yeah.
And I'm glad that we found this and it's something you want to explore. So please go explore it with someone who you don't actually know.
Yeah. Go explore this in a way where I don't have to be your therapist, please.
So I think we've covered all the safety tools. Again, if people in the chat want to mention one that we haven't covered, please do. But I wanted to move on and have our second hour be talking about problems and pitfalls. And so, so I've built a list of questions, and again, if the chat wants to ask their own things, please do. And these are things that I've either encountered, either at an actual game, or getting into arguments online, because that's a thing I do. A lot of people had very strong feelings when the first consent checklist came out.
I remember those feelings.
Yes.
Yeah, there was that dude last year with the British convention too, who got kicked out.
Oh
for,
yeah,
who was like, I do not use the X card, and then
what
showed
was
his
this
whole
story?
ass. Was it last summer? Karina, it looks like you remember, right?
I think it was last summer. It was during convention.
He got banned because he refused to use safety tools, and all of the characters, like all of the player characters, were teenagers, and he had them all kidnapped and sexually assaulted.
Like, it was a big cringe and not cool.
Yeah.
Talking about giving someone a referral for therapy.
Yeah, maybe he needed to talk with someone and not subject his players to therapy.
Yeah.
That he needs.
Wow, so yeah, that is sort of the first question I wanted to touch on. So, I assume as storytellers, we're all very pro safety tool. But what happens when someone comes to your table as a player and for whatever reason says, I don't like safety tools, I'm not going to fill out this checklist, I'm not going to use the X card, I'm going to play my character exactly the way I want to play them.
So my knee-jerk response to that is you can't play with me. But my kinder response is like, they don't have to use the X card. Like, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But they have to respect it when other people do. And if they're not going to respect other people's boundaries, then they cannot play at my table. Like,
and I think that's a very important distinction.
Yeah, because it's generally men who are like, I don't have any lines of veils. I don't care. You can do whatever you want. I want to go wherever in the game. It's fine. And, I mean, that's fine. I've never had one be like, no, boo, safety tools. But I have had some straight white male friends who are like, just whatever, no lines, no veils, anything. Let's just go. Let's just play. And that's fine, but as long as, you know, when someone else says, like, I'm uncomfortable, they're willing to stop, collaborate, and listen, then I'm fine with that. Otherwise, they don't get to play anymore.
And yeah, I completely agree. I think it's very much like, not wanting to use safety tools for yourself is one thing. You may not think you need them, and that's fair. Everybody knows themselves, but you can't enforce others not using them in a game where you're not running it. If you, for instance, are running a game without safety tools, you need to tell everybody playing that that's the case, and they get to make their own decision on it. But if one player is not letting other players use safety tools, that's just an issue of respect and respecting the players and respecting the story itself. If you're making it uncomfortable for other players, then you're not, you know, you shouldn't be at my table. Or I think anybody's table, but, you know, that is for each individual storyteller to decide.
Yeah, in the chat, Comat6 says they're more than likely playing an unsavory character to begin with. And I very much agree. So for me, someone saying, so if someone's saying, like, I don't like safety tools, I don't want to use them, yeah, it's your psyche, dude. But yeah, when they're saying, like, I'm just gonna play my character forward the way I want to, you know, that for me is always a red flag that you are planning on antagonizing people.
Yeah.
And you are planning on playing a character versus character game.
I'm just playing my character is such code for I'm just being a dick, but please don't be mad at me in the real life.
Yeah.
And I hate it because a lot of times you are just playing your character. Like, I've had some wonderful, wonderful character moments, and there you could see them in the early episodes of Paws and Claws where, like, Grimly and Lilia just straight up don't fight in the first battles because they're too scared. Because their characters are too afraid to fight. And I loved that. That's different of an,
yes,
I'm just playing my character than I'm just playing my character and I'm a rogue, so I'm going to rob you all while you're sleeping and then sell you to the big bad because fuck you. I'm chaotic neutral.
Yeah. I've encountered that. I've encountered that attitude a lot in vampire games. When my character was getting dead over what I thought was a very stupid reason. I am the harpy. I am snarky. I don't think that's a capital offense. But, they're just playing their character. And that was many long years ago. And I like to think that the community has grown since then. But you still do find that cropping up of, the person who, for some reason, enjoys being disruptive or antagonistic. And yeah, so for me, that's a red flag. And that is a sign that maybe I don't want this person at my table. Because as the storyteller, it's my responsibility to sort of look out for everybody else. And that's why I'm using safety tools. And I feel like maybe not letting this person into the game is part of those safety tools. Like, let me not expose my players to problematic or potentially traumatizing things, including this person.
Who is just awful.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, I've had a come to Jesus moment with some players who in D&D are like, I cannot play a monk without doing a racist East Asian stereotype because because that's how my monk talks. And I was like, well, that's not how your monk talks at my table because that is not what we are having. kind of thing. And I was like, so I'm like, well, that's my character. That's how I'm going to play my character. And I was like, well, then you don't get to play that character with me. And now you don't get to play with me at all because I'm keeping my players safe from you.
Right.
Well, and like it reveals so much about a person if that's what they decide to do. They can do anything. It is a fantasy world and they've chosen this. They've chosen to be a shitty person or be racist or, you know, like there's reasons a character could be a shitty person, but you can't be playing them just because you want to be a shitty person. There's such a difference and you can usually tell.
Yeah.
I don't feel there's one way to say, but you can kind of get the feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I also
like.
Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say there's just because you can't play with somebody doesn't mean that you can't be friends with them either. I mean, sometimes people are shitty in general and you don't want to be with them. But I mean, sometimes people are really bad players and they might be disrespectful in the game. And that might imply that they're disrespectful as friends, but it doesn't always. Like, some people get really wrapped up in the game, or maybe they're a rules lawyer, or maybe they're controlling in some way that you just don't want in your game. That doesn't mean that you don't have to, like, that doesn't mean that you can't be friends with them anymore. Like, you can be friends with people that you don't allow in your game for whatever reason.
Yeah. Sort of on the playing a bad guy character, I always like to bring up to invoke a non-Onyx Path franchise, Raceland from Dragonlance. I forget if he was chaotic evil or lawful evil, but he was evil. Like, he was definitely evil. But if you sort of imagine the Dragonlance story as being the result of a campaign, you can sort of see how Raceland's player took care to play an evil character without necessarily alienating the other players. So, because Raceland he's cranky, he's insulting, he's manipulative, but he goes along with the story. He doesn't murder anyone in their sleep.
And I think that's a really important thing. Like, you can, like, as Jess said, you can be friends with someone and not want them in your game because they can't be a team player. Just because they're your friend doesn't mean they're a team player and they can take the story, like, help you take the story where it needs to go. And you can be an evil character, you can be a chaotic evil character, but as long as you're willing to not fight with the other characters on where the story needs to go, like, then that's okay. You know, you can be doing evil things without disrupting everybody's play. Like, we had a character in one game I was in who he was, I think, lawful evil. And like, he worshipped a god of death. And like, he was the cleric. He was healing us. Because his entire way of playing the character was, I'm healing you because you're not meant to die yet. But as soon as I think somebody is meant to die, like my god is telling me they're meant to die, then I don't heal them or I kill them. But he didn't do that to the players. There was an occasion with an NPC where he did kill somebody because he's like, this person was meant to die and I was not going to save them because my god dictated that I not take someone from death who was meant to die. And that's very much a way of playing an evil, like a lawful evil cleric of death who still helps the party. And I think there's a lot of ways that can play a character like that where you're not disrupting the story and everybody's fun.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool way to play evil. And I know that if I had this person at my table, like I would be wanting to sort of like as sort of like a reward almost, uh, engineer situations where they could kill NPCs or let NPCs die so that they still got that experience of, here is my evilness coming to fruition. Let me express how awful my character is.
Yeah, like even though he's your friend, he's not a good person.
Right.
Or like even though he's evil, that doesn't mean he's like super mega evil and wants everyone to die. He's just, very morally obtuse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of love that because whenever I've had a player come up to me and say like I want to play an evil character, or it's happened where their character has progressed to the point where maybe they started as good or neutral and they've been through enough shit that they're like, I don't think my character's a good person anymore. You kind of want to talk to them about like, well, okay, if you are now pursuing evil or being like a bad guy, why are you still hanging out with these good people? What are you getting from it? And what are they getting out of hanging out with you? Because it seems like your goals are opposed. So in that one where the evil guy is the cleric, it makes a lot of sense. Like, well, he's a healer, like he's a jerk, but he's here to heal us.
Yeah.
So I like how well that's integrated.
Yeah, like it was a very cool character idea. And the party themselves could get mad at the character for just like letting this NPC die. But like he wasn't hurting the party. He was just letting an NPC die instead of, and some of the party understood that and other members of the party didn't. And that was because of very different alignments and goals.
Yeah, my partner once played a goblin who pretended really hard to be a human who charged us for healing. And it was great. So he would heal you and then tell you how much it cost. And if he knew you were broke, he wouldn't heal you.
Oh no.
Really funny. Oh.
I've had healers charge for healing in LARP, but that is because the way that the system was set up, it did have a monetary cost. Healing potions or so you could get the free stuff, but you would be sort of out of the battle for a couple hours, and nobody wanted to do that. So you would drink the expensive healing potions, and the healers were like, "Look, if you want me to keep making these for you, I need money." So we eventually went communist, or not communist, Medicare for all. Everybody would donate part of their loot to the healers, and as long as you gave the healers something that event, you could get whatever healing you needed. Yeah, so that was a tangent. Hey. So the next question that I wanted to talk about, a lot of players feel pressure, and we sort of talked about this a little bit before, to not be a problem player. They've heard stories, they've seen shitty players, and they don't want to be that person. Or, maybe they're not good at confrontation, they're not good at advocating for themselves or setting boundaries. And so they don't want to disrupt the game. They don't want to interrupt other people having a good time. And so they're really reluctant to use those safety tools, which, only creates problems in the long run when they do feel traumatized by something that happened. And you, as the storyteller, like, well, why didn't you say anything? And so, like, how can we as storytellers make sure that those sorts of people feel comfortable coming forward?
There's actually a cool safety tool that I didn't mention earlier that applies specifically for this situation. That's called the
Mm-hmm.
buddy system. And that's where each player has like a buddy and they look out for each other and they know each other's triggers and they pretty much call the X card for each other. And I've been at a table where we did that kind of without even knowing it was a thing. Just we
Mm-hmm.
knew each other well enough that I was like, oh, I can see he's not doing well. And he one of my other friends had done that for me in a situation where he was like, Jess is not happy right now. I'm going to exit the scene. Because I was in that state of like, I don't know what's happening, but I don't like this, where you're just sort of frozen. And that doesn't help like that player come forward, but having someone else look out for them and be proactive in protecting them can be great and keep the game going in a way, because then they don't feel bad and someone else is saying, and you don't know who like everybody's buddy is. It doesn't have to be spoken to any, you know, it's not like, oh, Corinne's calling the X card, Rachel must be upset kind of thing. You know, it's not that. And it's just a thing where it's like, oh, well, we're going to stop for a second and figure out what's going on here.
And I think that's a great idea. I love that. And that's something that I think has definitely happened like without planning before, where, you know, somebody who just knows another player well, like I think that's happened in a game I was in before, where somebody who knew the other player well was like talking to them like in DMs and stuff, and was like, hey, can we take a break for that person, because they knew, you know, that something wasn't right. But I think in general, a good way to try and make it so everybody feels comfortable stepping forward is just kind of drill in how okay it is, and that it's completely normal. And like the fact that, you know, I think one thing that helps as a storyteller is to tell your players when, you know, you think something could be getting serious. You know, like I mentioned earlier, like give them a warning of, hey, you know, today we're covering some really serious topics. Things could go to a dark place. If at any point you're uncomfortable, please let me know, because I know that this could be sensitive. And I think that opens the door a little bit wider for somebody who is reluctant to step forward, because it's already been addressed. You know, it was already brought up that, hey, this could happen today. And that makes it maybe feel less scary or less like you're breaking the immersion of the game, because it was already brought up once.
Yeah, and another thing that I think would be helpful, like so as a storyteller, you really need to know your players and sort of figure out, like, is this player, you know, the sort of person who is not likely to stand up for themselves in the moment for whatever reason. And so once you sort of figure out that your player is like this, you know, or even if you think that they might be, or if you don't know them well enough yet, uh, you should, you know, give them permission, and sort of like, you've got to be the one to be proactive about sort of pulling that information out of them, rather than expecting them to push it to you, if that makes sense.
I think that totally does. And that's something that definitely comes with the longer you're at a table and the more you know your players. I think even like we talked about decompression sessions earlier, and I think that's a great tool for kind of opening that door for people who are less likely to speak up for themselves, is if everybody's speaking up about, hey, what I liked, what I didn't like, I think that makes it a much less scary as well.
Yeah, and I think just as you said, reminding them regularly that it's okay. Like for Pause and Clause, we recently had a session 0.5, which was like a mid-season session 0, just to kind of refresh with everybody. Like, hey, we went to some darker places this season than we did last season. It's still a show, and the show, like, and a lot of people were saying, like, it feels like the show must go on. And we're like, but, you know, it doesn't. Like, yes, it is a show, and the show needs to go on, but it's not more important than your well-being. So let's talk about what's going on.
Yeah,
and if you're ever uncomfortable, like, let's talk about it.
Yeah. This is not a multi-million-dollar movie set where actors put themselves through all sorts of things. We're
even if it is, then you would have an agent.
Yeah. Yeah. A union representative.
Yeah, we're just, you know, we're playing a game and we're all friends and we all like each other, and let's, you know, we don't want to be hurting each other, even if our players are going through a lot of pain, or our characters are going through a lot of pain.
And if you don't all at least like each other or like understand each other, maybe the game isn't a good fit for somebody in the game. Or, maybe there's something wrong at the table. Like, that's something to be addressed. You might not all be comfortable with each other yet, but if you're not enjoying a certain person being in a game and you don't feel comfortable coming forward with them in the game, then that's something to be discussed. Like, that probably needs to be dealt with, because it's probably not going to just go away on its own. Probably. Maybe it will, but it's unlikely.
Yeah. In my experience, these sorts of problems tend to not fix themselves.
Generally, no.
Yeah. Yeah, so
they usually blow up.
That's another reason why, you as the storyteller should take point about checking in, and, check in individually, because sometimes people have problems speaking up in a group and they feel a lot more comfortable having a one-on-one. So session zeros are always good to make sure that the whole group is on the same page. But then also, if you're going through a non-anonymous consent checklist and you see, someone has flagged something yellow, have a private conversation with them. So, I guess that sort of leads into the next question of, so what happens when a player does use a tool? What happens when, they bring up something as a trigger or a line or an X card, and that just happens to be like a critical plot point hangs on that game element?
I think that's why session zero and stuff and establishing those things in advance is so important, because ideally your critical plot point will not hinge on something that is a trigger for someone. However, if something comes up that, they don't know about, I think it's our job as storytellers and as creative people to be able to modify that plot point in such a way that it's acceptable for the player, that it's okay. Because when an X card or pause or something is called, I mean, it depends on what it is that's going on. But a lot of times it requires us to be creative, and sometimes we might need a minute. And that's when we can, put up like the little pre-roll screen for a second, or be like, I just need a minute to think about how I'm going to readjust this. Like, it would put a lot of pressure on us to rethink a final encounter in that moment. But after a couple minutes, I think no plot is so golden that it's worth endangering the safety of your players. And with a little bit of creativity, anything can be reworked so that everyone's having a good time.
And I would say, very much in the vein of that, so much of playing a tabletop game, playing a game with others, is adapting. You don't know how your players are going to respond to things. And as a storyteller, it's basically your job to be able to improv, to be able to work with what they do. And that goes even more so when you're talking about a safety card, a safety tool being used. You need to be able to step up in that moment and do something else, even if that means putting off the big fight until next week so you have more time. You can always say, okay, let me take a moment, figure out what's something that could happen right now that can make this fight wait. Like maybe the building's collapsing, or maybe, a sudden flashback that one of the characters is having, something else that you can continue that session with to give yourself more time to rework it. Because you don't have to be a genius at improv to just be able to say, like, okay, we're going to quickly do something else and we'll cover this next week so I have time to plan. And usually your players are going to get, this isn't going to be super well formed, but it's something to do until we can figure out what to do with, whatever needs to be changed.
Yeah, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give other people who are, asking, how do I run a game? How do I be a storyteller? I always say, you should create a problem and then create 3 different avenues by which it can be solved. Because, we all know that our players are going to surprise us and they're going to go in directions that we didn't anticipate. And so if you just have 3 possibilities, you have a good idea of how to respond when they do the thing that you didn't expect in game, or when you find out like, oh, this person has a problem with this element. Well, that's okay because I've already prepped this alternate pathway that I can now put them on.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be just as simple as changing like the name of something. Like let's say your characters are about to face off with a cult. And that wasn't on cults weren't on your checklist, and one of your players was raised in a cult or escaped from a cult or something, and they were like, I never thought this would come up, but I do not like the idea of this being a cult. Well, guess what? Now they're a creepy evil church.
Yeah.
Or even just like a nefarious organization.
Right. And that might be enough. Like they can still do the exact same thing, have the exact same rituals, just you're calling them something different. They're no longer like the cult of Uland Frogface. They're now Uland Frogface Incorporated or something, Yeah. And it's sometimes just that shift is enough for somebody to be able to keep playing.
Yeah, and so what happens when a player says something is triggering that you find silly? Like, teddy bears? Really? Lollipops?
I'm not them. I don't know what they've been through. And in real life, I'm a trauma therapist, and I know a lot of weird shit can be triggering. So anything that they say, I pretty much just accept it because, like, I don't want to get too graphic about things that, happen to people. But when something traumatic happens to you, you might only remember flashes of it, and a big thing is like smells or a visual image. So when your agency or your consent is being violated, you might just remember the smell of coffee, or you just might remember staring at a teddy bear that was in the room. So maybe a player who is uncomfortable with like coffee or a teddy bear has something really messed up that to you seems silly.
Yeah.
And as it was just mentioned in the chat, always believing your players when they're saying something is outside of their comfort zone. You don't need to understand it to respect it. And I think especially if it's something small that seems silly to you, it's even easier to change. Like you can literally make that thing into something else because the story probably isn't hinging on it. If it's something that is very confusing and small, like a teddy bear, okay, well, now it's a stuffed doll, or now it's a wooden rocking horse. You can probably change it to something that's just different enough, as Jess mentioned before, that it no longer is a problem, because whatever that trauma is associated with it is probably very specific on that type of object, because that's basically the way the brain works.
Yeah, and that's sort of I suppose it's always good to keep in mind, like, if someone does say, like, I have a thing for teddy bears, like, part of just sort of, like, having the attitude of, yeah, okay, prevents you from asking, why do you have a thing against teddy bears? Because maybe they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, like,
we don't need to know.
Yeah.
We just need to know not to bring it up.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to learn as a storyteller, is that you don't need to understand why your players have these triggers or things they're uncomfortable with.
Mhm.
You just need to know not to cover them, or to be aware of them so that they don't come up, or to be able to stop it if another player brings it up. Like, that's all you need to know.
Yeah, and I think that's part of... I'm sorry?
That's okay, we didn't hear it.
The chat, everybody watching probably did. So sorry about that.
But yeah, and so I do think that's part of respecting your players and respecting their boundaries. Although, what happens when player is talking about triggers, and you get the feeling as a storyteller that they are trying to control the game or trying to avoid their character experiencing icy consequences and character consequences. Like, I don't want anything bad to happen to my character ever.
I have not had this happen in a game I was running, but I have been in games where this has happened. And not with safety tools, but just where things got a little bit heated when a character was being injured or something. And they were like, I don't want that happening. I don't want that happening. I don't want that happening. And at that point, I think it's worthwhile to do actually what the storyteller in that game did, who happened to be their significant other. And they just kind of looked at them and said, is there something going on between us? Or is this about the game? And they're like, can we go talk privately? Because this doesn't seem like it's about the game anymore. And in that situation, I mean, it doesn't have to be your significant other, but I would want to talk to that player and see, like, is there something else that's going on? Because I would think it's atypical for a player to be like, nothing bad happens to me ever. I'm playing an RPG to win and never get hurt.
Yeah, I have experienced this a little bit in Vampire. One person in particular was like, I don't like being blamed for things that are not my fault. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. This is a vampire LARP. You're playing a neonate. That's going to happen.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and so we just sort of negotiated like, okay, so we sort of came up in the game where you could ask to skip over a scene. You could say, okay, we will say that the prince just chewed you out and extracted a boon from you, but you will not have to play that out. And that player, as far as I know, was okay with that compromise.
And I would say that, most players, generally speaking, are probably fine with consequences for their actions. And maybe if it seems like they're being obstinate or making ways for their character not to have a problem, I definitely think, being able to skip over the scene, or as Jess said, like talking to that player one-on-one, see what's going on. But I think another option is maybe just, be straightforward with them, even at the table, and be like, okay, well, there is a consequence for this action. This has failed or this has happened and something has to happen. What are you comfortable with happening in the scenario that you think is a fair consequence? And you can always work with them from there to find something that is a fair consequence for that action that still allows there to be consequences, because in life there is always consequences. But making sure that your player is okay with that consequence and that it seems fair is also important. You don't want them walking away and feeling like they, got cheated out of something they were trying to do. It's got to be reasonable. And maybe they're feeling like they were being picked on or something like that. And that's something you can talk to them about.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've had games where players did say specifically, like, I'm being picked on. To which the DM responded, you rolled 3 nat ones in a row. Like, sorry, that's just how it is. But I think having that conversation of like, so what would be fair, or what do you think would be a good result here? Like, what are you okay with happening? Or maybe it's just not always the good game for them. Because, again, and that's a shitty thing to learn in the middle of a session. Yeah. But sometimes, like, if you're playing Call of Cthulhu and you don't want your character to ever get hurt or die, like, Call of Cthulhu is not a good game for you. Game.
Yeah, that's not the game for you. Yeah. And maybe that's just the conversation you need to have with the player.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like it's worth emphasizing that it's okay to sort of interrupt the narrative. Because, like, we were talking about players feeling reluctant to call the X card, and sometimes storytellers feel like they don't want to interrupt other people's good time. And I think that this is a situation in which by interrupting the game and taking that moment to have that out of character conversation, you know, yes, it's disrupting play, but it is contributing to the overall good time, sort of the Gestalt experience, I guess.
I also think, and this is my own personal biases coming into play, but I think we put way too high of a value on maintaining the narrative, or like not disrupting play, not breaking character. When, like we already talked about, we're all people and we all have real shit going on. And if it's clear that somebody is like not happy with something that's happening, maintaining the illusion is not helpful at that point because they're already breaking it. And at that point, just saying like, well, the show must go on and we're going to continue to, you know, make you unhappy because we must maintain the narrative is not like, who is that for?
So, yeah, that's a really good point. In that if someone is having is experiencing out of character distress, like immersion's already broken. So you as a storyteller are not breaking anything yourself to check in with them. You're supporting your players, which is what you should be doing.
And you're ensuring that, you know, the game in the future can, you know, be better as a whole, you know, making sure that everybody is okay, that everybody is understanding why things are happening, and things like that can make it so that you can go to a more narrative place than maybe you otherwise would have been able to before that issue was dealt with.
Yeah, and so I suppose the last question should be, you know, how do you handle it when a player comes to you either in game or after game and says, you know, this was the problem for me. And so, you know, how is the best way to respond?
I'm usually immediately racked with guilt for not picking up on it during the session.
I know.
Yeah.
And yeah, and me too. And I think a lot of good storytellers would feel that same feeling. And so, you know, how do you personally process that and still support, you know, the I guess higher values of having safety tools in a game and fostering that culture?
So if it's something that came up as part of the game, like if it's a trigger was touched by something that we encountered, I of course apologize for that, for not knowing, but also even if it's something I didn't know, I'll apologize for triggering them. And because, you know, it's a decent person thing to do. But also make a note, and I'll like add that to my list that I keep of things not to bring up, and kind of try and de-escalate the situation, process them through it, and talk about like if they need to retcon anything that happened, because if it was a big plot significant thing that really messed them up, like, do we want to remove that from the game, or are they comfortable continuing from there and it's something that we just, you know, never mention that aspect of it again? If it's something that came up because of actions with another player character, that's when I try and have either the two of them talk to each other, with either me facilitating, or we get everybody together and say like, you know, what can we do as a team? Because we're all here to have fun. So like, a lot of my games have rules where if there's going to be player versus player stuff, we talk about it in advance to make sure, like, we say, and you might have seen it on the Pause and Clause stream, someone will say, I'm okay with PvP right now. Just putting it out there before they get, you know, punched in the face by another dog. Because otherwise, we don't want to, like, make it not fun for anybody. And so that's something like there's only so much as a storyteller I can do. I can't control the actions of my players, but I can try and get everybody on the same page. So if we all need to have a get together and talk about like the direction we want things to go in and how we want to get there, then that's something that might need to come up if it wasn't like me triggering them, but another character triggering them.
Yeah, and I feel like having a game that allows for PvP or CVC, I've seen it sometimes called, that adds an entirely new dimension onto safety tools because if players are expected to get along and work together, it is unlikely. It is still possible, but it is unlikely uh, that a player might trigger another one. But if you are allowing other players to get into fights with each other, even to kill each other, I mean, I guess we could do an entire show just on PvP and CVC. But
Yeah,
I
that
guess
opens a lot of doors.
yes, yes.
I think it comes
I
up
guess
with a lot of the games that we probably run on this channel, though. Like, that probably happens a lot in Vampire, I would assume.
yes, it happens a lot in Vampire. And in the good Vampire games that I've been in, it's always been an evolving conversation. Because I've been in games where it's, yeah, your character might die. He's probably going to kill you. Suck it up. And I quit those games. And, there were other games that were a lot more enjoyable where, the storytelling staff made specific space to have conversations about character versus character, especially when, because they were reading all of our chats and they knew when a coup was happening or when a primogen was about to get deposed. And so they knew, like, okay, we should have another conversation about character versus character and limits and expectations. Bad things might happen to your character, talk to your other players, bleed, 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 stuff like that.
And I would say, like, on this topic, I think, yeah, like it's very important for players to know it's a possibility before it happens. Even if it's just the way you set up the game. I was running a heist one shot where every player had an individual goal. And so it was pretty straightforward at that point that if your goals are not aligning with each other, you could end up fighting each other at the end of this. But there was a really young player playing. And so and I was not going to do any PvP until that player was gone because he had to leave earlier than everybody else. And so basically, as soon as that player left, every other player turned on each other. They're like, yeah, we were just waiting for him to leave because we didn't want to upset him. We didn't think he would have fun with it, but we are totally down for it. And I think that was just really great of them because they knew immediately, just the way the one shot was written, like what I told them, that PvP was an option. But they knew a kid of like 13 wasn't going to understand that. So as adults, they're like, yes, we will not even bring it up until it's time for, the kid to be done with the game. And then it's a free-for-all. We're all going to kill each other. In the end, they actually got along and completed all their goals without fighting each other because it was possible. But first they had to almost kill like 2 players before they realized, oh shit, we can actually do this together. You didn't actually write us into a corner. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I just knew you would immediately assume I did. You don't have to fight each other. You just chose to.
Yeah. I'm just imagining like a game of Dead of Winter where everyone is a betrayer.
That reminds me of L5R game, Legend of the Five Rings, that I was in years ago. So we were playing, I think it was like everybody was a crab and I was a crane, and then we all died. And so everybody made scorpions, came back, and so scorpions are they're the underhanded spy clan. They sort of have the idea of, we do all the dishonorable stuff so other people don't have to. They have this associated clan called the Monkey, who are like their cousins, but like they're new to all of this and they're super innocent. And the scorpions are like, we're going to protect them. So everybody was a scorpion. I decided I wanted to play a monkey, and so it was really fun where they would have like their super secret scheming meetings, and they'd be like, "Why don't you go into the garden with that guy?" I'm like, "Okay."
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. I love that.
Yeah, and like it probably would have damaged the flow of game, like if we were not all willing to buy into this. So I was like, yeah, of course, you guys can totally like cut me out of this scene because that's what our characters would do. And the storyteller always made sure that I had something to accomplish myself. But yeah, group buy-in is always a good thing.
I was gonna add, I think this is where and I know some storytellers, sorry, I just cut myself off in the middle of saying what I was saying. But I think sometimes storytellers will say, like, this is a heist game, you must all be thieves. Whereas other times, if it's a more broad thing where you say, like, this is the world, make your characters. And you want to run a heist game, but they come back with, like, a bunch of knights, then you might want to kind of change the way that your heist will take place. Like, maybe they're not going to sneak in. Maybe they're going to, get hired as a royal guard and then be gifted the thing that they need that way. So kind of letting your players shape your narrative by they tell you what kind of game they want via character creation.
Yes, that is another thing that I'm a big proponent of is, always look at your players' character sheets and figure out, what are they telling you about the story that they want. If they have a flaw, they probably put that on there for a reason. When I was running a LARP, it was possible for players to take a mystery disadvantage, which was just like something bad is going to happen to you. Maybe in your backstory you give hints, maybe not. And that was always a really useful way where we're like, okay, we need to introduce this plot element. Which character should we deliver it via? Like, well, who put mystery on their character sheet? Who actually wants that?
That's cool. There's a thing in Warhammer Fantasy where the humans are all doomed in some way, and you get to pick your doom, basically. So, like, how you will die or how something is coming that's going to really mess you up, and it's always hanging over your head, and it's always there for the DM/GM storyteller to be like, well, this is a thing. So, one of my players has one that it's a like tied to Futurama where Fry's being carried away, I think, by a pterodactyl and just yells, "This is a cool way to die!" So his doom is just, this is a cool way to die. So every time he sees something flying overhead that's big, he's immediately terrified. And having that as a mechanic is fun to play with because, it might not be the time, but maybe it's the time.
And
That's cool.
I think that's really important to know, like, what the players are okay with, like, actually literally happening to their character in the way of death. Like, it's something to talk about. If you think that, your game could feature these characters dying, like they're going to be put in serious situations, they could die. They may not be strong enough to fight the thing they're fighting. Are they okay with dying? Because you need to make sure that if that's a game where death is a very real possibility, that they're okay with it. And you need to find a way to make that fulfilling for them in some way. Even if they're going to die, they can still fulfill their purpose. They can still do something great. They can still die in a really cool way. Like, generally speaking, I'm totally fine with any character I ever play dying as long as they do something cool.
Yes.
Because, like, I just want it to be a good story. That's basically what I'm in for anytime I play a game is I may die, but if I die, I'm going to go out like a badass. Or do something really great, or it'll be really weird. And you're like, you died doing that? Like, yep, I did.
I'm the exact same way, because Vampire LARP teaches you to be okay with losing characters, and I just want my character's death to have an impact on the story. It doesn't have to be a huge one, but as long as something happens next because of that, then I'm okay with my characters dying. So anyway, we are coming up on time. So I guess I just want to ask for any final thoughts about safety tools, using them, having them in your games.
I love them, use them, respect them. If somebody says no and they don't need them and they hate them and they are running the game, don't play with that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my final thoughts are basically the same thing. Safety tools are great. They help you have a better game. Using them is so important, and it is important to the health of your table and of your players. If you don't understand why you need safety tools after this discussion, reach out to me. I'll talk about you with it. I'm sure any of my companions would probably be good with that too. I won't talk for them though. But like, ask someone who's used safety tools. Ask why it helps. I think a big part of safety tools is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and have empathy for things you don't understand, and understanding that you don't know everything. And sometimes that's hard, but if you want to have a good game and a fun game, the safest way to do it is with safety tools.
I suppose I would say, the safety tools are not meant to be a one and done. They are meant to be ways in which you can have conversations about things that, would make the game unpleasant for you, for whatever reason. And, as a storyteller, keep the conversation going, because just because you have safety tools, doesn't mean that, oh yeah, you don't have to, it doesn't absolve you of responsibility. So, even though your car has airbags and seatbelts, you still drive the speed limit.
Hopefully.
I assume that everybody who plays Onyx Path games is of sterling moral character.
Let's hope they use the safety tools of driving and then also just drive safely.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I don't know, just again, I see a lot of people say that safety tools keep them from going to adult places in games, but I think you can go to darker, more adult places in a game with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if you want to go somewhere dark and adult and the safety tools make it clear that that is not going to be happening, to move on and look for the game that you want. And, no hard feelings. This group wants to play this sort of game. You want this other sort of game. It's probably better for you to go find that other game.
And there's so many people playing. There is a game for you.
Yes.
Maybe the one you're in isn't the right one, but through using safety tools, you can figure that out. And that's important, so that everybody's having a good time. Because in the end, it is a game. And having fun and having a good time and enjoying yourself and having a experience that you want to repeat is important. Not every game is like fun in the sense of fun, but you should want to come back.
Yes. Yeah, or at least have happy memories.
Yes.
Of your
Remember it
time.
fondly. Remember, have it stir emotions that were important to you and that you enjoyed, even if the emotions themselves were negative emotions. It has to be in an in-character way that you approve of.
Yes. Well, thank you both so much for making the time to be here today. Thank you to our wonderful Twitch audience. I like to wrap it up by giving people a chance to promote their stuff. Where can we support you? We started with Jess at the beginning of the show, so let's start with Corinne now.
Hi, I'm Corinne, otherwise known as Manic Pixie Girl on Twitter, as you can see from the overlay. If you want to support me, I run a game right here on the Onyx Path, Saturdays at 4 Central, called Purge of the Serpent Holds. It's a Scarred Lands 5e game, and my entire cast is fantastic and wonderful, and it's a little bit sillier than most Scarred Lands games because I am a very whimsical person. But, we have fun. You can also find me on Roll the Roll, which is my usual Twitch channel, where I play games. I will be running games soon, and they are all great people. The biggest important thing that's coming up is that Roll the Roll is going to be streaming on Paizo's channel during PaizoCon.
Nice.
Yes, we have, I believe, the noon Central Standard Time slot on 5:30. We'll be playing an excerpt from Pathfinder 2e Extinction Curse. So come check us out. We are a very good group, and it has me in it. So if you like me, I will be there.
So when is PaizoCon happening?
PaizoCon is, I believe, starting on the 26th of this month, so next week, and then it's going through, I think, the 31st. So the slot for my group on Paizo's Twitch is on the 30th.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Jess, how about you? Want to promote your promotables?
Yeah. I run Paws and Claws, The Lost Tales of Pugmire, every Tuesday here on the Onyx Path at 7 p.m. Eastern. And on Fridays on my own channel, Angry Nerd Girl, I run Three Flings, The Adventures of Three Tieflings. On Saturdays, I play on Sigil Entertainment's Storytellers Vault. It's a bunch of creators, like writers and artists playing things that we wrote, which is a cool way to see the stuff that we did in the way that we like it done. And
It sounds like a lot of fun.
it's really fun. There's a couple different games. I play in the ones on Saturdays at 4 Eastern. And also, I write games and supplements. You can see one of them right behind me, the Book of Seasons Solstices. But if you like Scarred Lands, I wrote a supplement for it. It is in the Sluretian Vault, and it's called It's Dangerous to Go Alone. It is a whole bunch of pirate NPCs and monsters and baby versions of those monsters that you may take with you or encounter on your journey.
Oh, I'm going to have to look that up. I love it.
Yeah.
Baby monsters.
So be sure to check that out. There is a baby cracupine in there.
Okay, so I just want to interject real fast. My players befriend absolutely everything. If I gave them the option, they would have that. They would have literally every monster I gave them just as a friend.
So I made an aquatic version of the horn saw called a seesaw, and and there's a seesaw foal in there as well. There's a porcupine version of a kraken, and there's a baby version of that too. And then there's some creepy things called tentaculars.
Tentaculars?
Yeah.
That sounds tentaculous.
So that's me.
Awesome.
That's what I do.
Cool. My name is Rachel. I'm Stolen Fires pretty much everywhere. I just actually put out a title on Storytellers Vault. It's part of the spring sprint. It's called Persephone Rising. It is for Vampire the Requiem. Crazy vampire thinks she's a goddess. She's gonna kill a lot of people. Stop her. I also want to promote.
Or join her.
I do mention that as an option, but she's probably about to break the masquerade. So
you'd probably perish anyway.
Unless, players always surprise you. Maybe they come up with a really great solution. Also, check out the Technocracy Reloaded Kickstarter. It's got a couple days left. It looks really, really cool. They are just breaking all sorts of stretch goals. I believe right now the next one is going to be an increased art budget.
And they're so close.
Yeah. So go check them out. Pitch in for the book. It looks like it's going to be really amazing. I love the Technocracy. They're the best bad guys who probably aren't bad guys. Yes, and I run a Changeling game on this channel every Thursday night from 9:30 to 11:30 Eastern. So come check us out tomorrow. Thank you all so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, friends.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, safety tools are important.
Yes.
Mwah.